So, as Matthias sort of mentioned, my main interest is political economy. I'm particularly keen on free banking. And so I suppose to summarize, I've never seen a monetary policy instrument that I liked. I suppose, as I've gone over my career, I've seen one new policy instrument after another rolled out. And here I'd like to talk particularly about the political economy of central bank digital currencies. I have to say that my initial thought about this was, I wonder what they're doing. Are they just trying to be hip? And I was fairly convinced when people started talking about central bank digital currencies that nobody really knew what they were doing. But it was kind of a case of we better do something so that we don't sort of lose out. And so basically I never took them seriously, and partly because I just didn't understand them myself. But in the last only few weeks, really, I've come to have quite a different view. I think they're actually quite sinister. So let me start off with Adam Smith and this lovely quote of his about the man of system, who is apt to be very wise in his own conceit. And Smith goes on to say that he seems to imagine that he can arrange the different members of a great society with as much ease as the hand arranges the pieces on a chessboard. And of course, many of us have kind of used this as a starting point to laugh at central planning. But I think my worry is that the man of system might soon have his day. And please forgive me if I gloss over the definition of what these things are and just assume that the context, clarifies it. My basic argument is that there's a power grab in play, which is rapidly sweeping aside a free society, what's left of it, and most people are oblivious to it. So now, I'm not suggesting, so we're talking here about technofascism, and I'm not suggesting that the people proposing central banks are fascists or bad people, or anything like that. But just let's go back to textbook definition. Fascism is the rule of the few. And technofascism means an extreme concentration of power in a handful of technocrats who can exert complete control over a subdued population and manage the great unwashed, in other words, the rest of us. This involves an alliance of state and big business against the population. Essentially, the broad sweep of it is to reduce us to techno-serfdom. Now, how many people have consciously thought this thing through, I have no idea. But one is reminded of the Great Reset type of agenda. Okay, so my point is that the CBDCs are the techno-fascist fantasy. To me, they have no obvious social benefits to society. So basically, their benefits to us are trivial. I found a nice quote on the web. Has Gomez, he says, among the many races the pandemic has accelerated, none is so pointless as the issue of CBDCs. So it seems harmless enough, but then suppose a central bank has its own CBDC, then step by step first compels everybody to use it. So we get rid of substitute. And then imposes other restrictions as needed. And basically you end up with a central bank with unlimited powers or almost unlimited powers of control. So this worries me. And so the obvious kind of analogy is with a Trojan horse. Okay, so I suppose my message is that we should not see CBDCs in purely techno terms, but in much broader terms about the balance of power in society, which are much, much more important than anything else. Well, you could sort of say that there is a techno-fascist strategy. I don't want to sound too conspiratorial, but let's just suppose that there might be one. First off, we destroy financial privacy. We introduce CBDCs as a boring, low-tech issue. Nobody pays any attention. We suppress crypto. We abolish cash. we establish a purely digital economy. And then the results are, number one, that it enables new forms of monetary policy. And secondly, no privacy, no rights, no cash. That worries me. Who's going to control the guardians here? The tactics would be along these lines: disguise a power grab by a power grab agenda by sort of technobabble, gloss over dangers and costs, numb the population with propaganda, and so forth. And there's a delightful quote by Mencken that comes to mind, that the whole aim of practical politics is to keep the population alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. Then we also have the freedom trumps safety ploy, which we've seen a lot of since 9/11. And there's also the bad guys. You know, we need these tools to deal with all those bad guys out there, and so forth. The question then is, should we trust these people to use their power wisely? Well, to me, the answer is fairly obvious. I'll give you a couple of quotes here. If you put Milton Friedman, if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years, there'd be a shortage of sand. That captures it fairly well. But the best quote is by Sowell. He says, the most basic question is not what is best, but who shall decide what is best. Okay. So, so the potential, the enormous potential of CBDCs, I think none of us have really got our head around this. Augustine Carstens recently said the key difference with a CBDC is that the central bank will have absolute control under the rules and regulations that determine its use. So this allows a number of things. It gives increased flexibility to set interest rates. You can set differential interest rates, the power of cancellation, the ability to cancel anyone's money holdings, and cancellation can be partial or full and can be done in an instant. The veto on any expenditure, the central bank can block or punish any expenditures of which it disapproves, and so forth. And in any case, just mapping ahead, we can use, or they can use CBDCs to implement NERP, to implement helicopter money, to implement pseudo-economic policies, to implement MMT, to implement lockdown, and to basically introduce radically innovative monetary policies. Okay, so let's go through these just quickly. First, we have NERP, a digital version of Silvio Gesel's stamped money, which in my opinion is a bad idea. My objections to it, first off, because it contradicts time preference. And secondly, because we want positive interest rates due to, as compensation for default risk and because of productivity of capital issues. I have a question. If we've never had negative interest rates since Hammurabi, why are they a good idea now? Another point is that, as I understand it, NERP is normally proposed to stimulate the economy. But if NERP were implemented and banks deposits were taxed at the NERP rate, then we basically have a tax. And so I don't see the stimulative side of it. Anyway, those are just objections to NERP. They can use CBDCs to implement helicopter money in very innovative, technically elegant ways. Instead of just having a helicopter drop and dropping it from the sky, you can target it through personalized accounts. Of course, that's always what I think was in mind. You can target it so that the people you like get the bigger handouts. So no dollar note gets wasted on the wrong recipient if that's how you feel. It's very, very simple to implement. So in that sense, it's technically very elegant. You can use them for pseudo-economics. So Martin Hutchinson defines pseudo-economics as the use of economic policy to punish the disfavored. It's not a new idea. but I've never heard of it described as such. So once the government has coerced everyone into using central bank digital currency that it controls, it has absolute control over payments, and then it can control everything. So, I mean, obviously, it can block payments to or from individuals or organizations it does not like. It can go after its enemies and so forth. Anybody that got on the wrong side, whistleblowers, these sorts of people can be subjected to this punishment. There's some really neat applications. So if you had a government dominated by health fanatics, we would be compelled to follow personalized health recommendations determined by the latest health fad. Similarly, environmentalists, if they were in charge, they would be telling us what we can and cannot buy and so forth. Well, then if you had a theocracy, you'd have religious fanatics preventing us doing immoral things in order to save our souls. So it's, lots of uses here. To give you a modern example, is the Chinese social credit system, which essentially surveils and controls the population through individual social credit scores. So good behavior is rewarded, bad behavior is punished. Bad behavior might be bad driving, loitering, smoking where you shouldn't, making frivolous purchases, posting fake news. Punishments are many and varied, like a slowed internet connection, a ban on flights, having your dog taken away, blacklisting, so forth. This has been described as a futuristic version of Big Brother out of control. So MMT. So what is MMT? Well, MMT is essentially a combination of, number one, we print money to finance government spending, and number two, we only use taxes to punish whoever we want to punish. So it's a combination of helicopter money and pseudo-economic policy. In this case, the helicopter money payments are not distributed to the population, but they're distributed to the government, which actually, by the way, Jason raises some fascinating accounting issues about, how we classify these payments. We can use it as a lockdown tool. So imagine a future lockdown with this kind of CBDC in place, then the government can ensure that people cannot spend outside of a certain distance from their home. They cannot spend on unapproved items. They cannot spend outside approved time. So you can only go out once a day or once a week or whatever it is. And they can have their spending opportunities restricted if they refuse to get a jab. And it does sound far-fetched, but Pakistan is just currently into something that is not a million miles away. In Pakistan, there's a heck of a lot of lockdown skepticism. And the health minister for the Punjab recently announced that anyone who refused to accept the jab would have their SIM cards disabled. Okay, and she says, we're doing all we can to compel people to get vaccinated. The government cannot allow individuals who do not want to get vaccinated, because that would risk lives and so forth. And there are other restrictions also being considered. So now I suppose, most interesting aspect of this is the implications for radically new monetary policy. And I've just kind of thrown some ideas, some of which are kind of familiar and others I don't know. Inflation targeting and control. You see, this is a nice one. So obviously, it's very obvious. If inflation's above target, we increase the supply of CBDCs. And conversely, if inflation, have I got that right? No, sorry, I've got increase, decrease the wrong way around. I apologize. When inflation exceeds target, we increase the supply of money. When it's below target, we decrease it. This sits very well with MMT, by the way, because imagine you have MMT implemented and then we have a lot of inflation. Well, then you can just cancel, a lot of those balances, and then you've got inflation under control. You also have the question of demand management, or rather demand control, because if the central bank wants to boost spending, it can announce it will cancel or tax money holdings to encourage people to spend more. So you have here a CBDC with expiry dates. It's a perfect tool to counter money hoarding, which is very interesting from a technical point of view. So basically, we can, instead of trying to manage aggregate demand, we can more or less control it. We can compel people to buy government-approved products as well. So there's a micro side to it as well. And then you have the question of central bank industrial policy. And once firms have accounts with the central bank, then they can borrow. The potential is there to borrow or lend to the central bank. And then basically we have the central bank making industrial loans, and therefore we have industrial policy. We can apply differential treatments to preferred sectors or preferred clients. And already we can see that the central banks are talking about central bank climate change policy. So, for example, if something is ESG approved, we give it better rates in some sense. If we don't like it, like coal or diesel, then we give it adverse rates. So a lot of things there to be developed. Then we have the war on cash. Well, the war on cash is essential for this agenda because we need to eliminate cash. We need to eliminate competitors to central bank digital currency. If we keep cash and we implement NERP, then everybody will flee to cash, for example. Besides which, when people use cash, their transactions can't be traced and so forth. So the bottom line here is that we've had it for some time, the war on cash and an alliance of big payment firms and technofascists to abolish cash as a competitor to digital. Of course, this ignores the benefits of cash, primarily anonymity. So we have a lot of anti-cash propaganda, cash is on its way out and all this sort of stuff. This ignores the fact that cash is still used for most transactions. It's also, if cash is on its way out, then it will disappear naturally anyway. So you don't need the war on it. There's the various technically inefficient arguments, which essentially have an underlying paternalist premise that somebody else knows better what we want than we do ourselves. So the technical efficiency of cash is only one part of the issue here. If I use cash or you use cash, it's because there are reasons why you want to use cash. There's the bad guys argument, which is really the most perhaps common argument, but in my opinion, a really, really dumb argument. It basically says bad guys use these things, so we should abolish them. I really don't think these people have thought this one through. Bad guys use the same amenities as the rest of us, so let's abolish everything. I mean, it makes no sense. Also, the bad guys use cash argument is factually flawed. First of all, you have images of people, with suitcases of cash and so on. That's very passé. Your modern bad guy would use the Amazon gift cards and things like that. In any case, there's clear evidence that the big, let's say the vehicles of money laundering and all that sort of stuff are accountancy firms and banks. We had the Panama Papers, for instance, and we had the lovely Danske Bank scandal with $250 billion in Russian drug money or whatever it was, laundered from under the eyes of the regulators. And meanwhile, we have all this AML stuff that the rest of us have to put up with. There's a nice quote here. Ken Rogoff's book, The Curse of Cash, probably is probably the best known piece on the WOC side. And Jim Grant just destroys it in his review. In the Wall Street Journal, I think it was. He said, strip away the technical pretense and what you have is politics. The author wants the government to control your money. It's as simple as that. So anyway, that's the war on cash. And there are other problems. the cyber vulnerabilities, lack of access. If the only money permitted is central bank digital currency, what about parts of the world where there's no internet access? But the biggest one is that the CBDC represents a single point of failure for the whole system. So take it out and the system goes down. And to give you just one example, 2017, Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico. It knocked out the grid, and so all the usual digital stuff, ATMs and so on, stopped working, and people were unable to buy food and other necessities if they didn't have cash. Stores were only allowing people to pay cash. So the Fed came in and flew in a plane load of cash to meet payroll disasters and save the day. Now, my question is, what would we do in a similar situation if there were no cash? It's bound to happen. And Ryan McMaken has a lovely quote. He says, "In a cashless world, you'd better pray the power never goes out." Okay, so let me give a couple of case studies. One of them is Australia's Centrelink welfare policy, where 80% of welfare recipient welfare payments were to go on a credit card so that people couldn't spend the money on booze and fags and drugs and so on. Now, this sounds great because it limits the ability of people on welfare to live it up at taxpayers' expense. But the problem is that it concedes the fundamental principle of a social credit system, that the people should only spend on items approved by the state. Okay, this sets a really bad precedent. Like, for example, why should the limit be 80% and not 100%? And why not apply similar restrictions to other people with bad habits and so on? Because nanny state knows best. Now, the other example is the digital yuan. And this is being rolled out currently nationwide in China. Media attention focuses on comparing it to Bitcoin. I think this is a major mistake. So, for example, the digital yuan does not live on a public ledger. It's not a peer-to-peer currency. It's not a crypto. It doesn't have a market valuation independent of the old yuan and so forth. It's controlled by Chinese authorities who can alter and delete anyone's account at will. This is the kind of thing that I was worrying about earlier. The DY offers authorities a new means of surveilling, controlling, and punishing anyone. That's on top of the existing social credit, or rather, it dovetails into it. So it gives total control. So I would say, just my particular view, you might say I'm biased, that this is to be avoided at all costs. It's completely incompatible with a free society. And I put together a few quotes. I'm nearly done. I put together some nice quotes in case anybody was interested. Peter Earle says, digital currency may over time morph into nothing less than weaponizable money. Okay. Dominic Frisby, every transaction ever made will be visible to the all-seeing government. That's a very comforting thought. Kyle Bass, imagine a currency that almost has a mind of its own. It knows your account data, knows your birthday, your social security number, where you live, and what you like to buy. And all this knowledge would be sitting in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And then finally, the motto of the social credit system, keeping trust is glorious and breaking trust is disgraceful. Okay. So how do we fight back? I'm basically outlining an agenda here. Obvious stuff, recognize what we're dealing with, don't believe them, do your own work, think for yourself. On the freedom versus safety issue, Steve Baker has a delightful Twitter quote. He says, don't trade liberty for security ever. You will lose both and deserve neither. Somebody else said, central bank currencies, digital currencies are creepy fantasy. So, conclusions. So it seems to me the benefits to society are zero. The dangers are enormous and really unthinkable. The only issue that matters is the potential of these things to facilitate a reach to total power by our betters, the best, in, I think, Plato's term, whose superiority entitles them to rule. What guarantees do we have that this wouldn't be abused? Well, none, basically. And that's it. And thank you very much.